Most people think that great heroes are unbeatable warriors, fearless kings, or wizards of unspeakable power. But what if I told you that the greatest hero of Middle-earth didn't wield a sword, wear a crown, or master powerful spells? What if the true protagonist of this story was a simple hobbit, small, unknown, and with no thirst for glory? Frodo Baggins wasn't a warrior, yet he bore upon his shoulders the most terrible burden ever known, the One Ring, Sauron's ultimate weapon, capable of bending kings, corrupting nations, and annihilating all hope. But this isn't just the tale of a cursed object or a suicidal mission. This is the journey of someone who faced not only the horrors of Middle-earth, but also the inner demons that arise when absolute power is within reach. Frodo didn't merely survive battles against ringwraiths, unexpected betrayals, and the clutches of a power-hungry creature. He also withstood the temptation to become something greater than himself. And that is precisely what sets him apart. His heroism didn't come from sheer strength, but from resilience, from the ability to press on when everything seemed impossible. So get ready to discover the truth about Frodo Baggins. Not the romanticized version many know, but the real story filled with challenges, sacrifices, and impossible choices. Because in the end, The Lord of the Rings isn't just about a ring, it's about those who had the courage to destroy it. Frodo Baggins was born in a time of relative peace in Middle-earth, never imagining that one day his name would become legendary. The son of Drogo Baggins and Primula Brandybuck, he grew up surrounded by the green fields of the Shire, living a simple, carefree childhood. However, fate isn't always kind, and a tragedy struck him early on. His parents died in a mysterious accident while sailing on the Brandywine. Orphaned and without clear prospects, Frodo found a new home in the arms of his eccentric uncle Bilbo, a hobbit who had experienced adventures worthy of song. Bilbo Baggins was no ordinary hobbit. His journey with the dwarves to the Lonely Mountain, chronicled by none other than Tolkien himself, had transformed him into a peculiar figure in the Shire. He welcomed Frodo into Bag End, a cozy burrow in Hobbiton, where the young hobbit grew, up listening to tales of dragons, treasures, and distant lands. While most hobbits were content with a quiet life, Frodo felt a longing for something more. As if a silent shadow hovered over him, he sensed that his destiny was intertwined with something far greater than the feasts and harvests of his homeland. That restlessness grew over the years. Bilbo, who aged at a strangely slow pace, became his mentor, teaching him not only about maps and ancient languages, but also about the dangers lurking beyond the Shire's borders. When he turned 33, the age of adulthood for a hobbit, Frodo's life took an unexpected turn. Bilbo announced that he would be leaving the Shire, never to return. But before he went, he left Frodo not only his inheritance and his home, but also something that would change his life forever, a simple golden ring. Without knowing that this little object carried the fate of all Middle-earth, Frodo accepted his gift and his burden. Frodo Baggins inherited more than just a cozy home at Bag End. He inherited a legacy. Under Bilbo's tutelage, he grew up surrounded by rare books, maps of far-off lands, and stories of ancient times. While other hobbits led predictable lives, he learned about elves, dwarves, and legendary battles. This made him a different hobbit, one a bit more reserved, yet with a keen eye for what lay beyond the Shire's hills. His heart yearned for something he couldn't quite name, as if a distant echo of past adventures was calling him away from home. However, even the wisest hobbit couldn't foresee the true weight of that inheritance. Among Bilbo's belongings was an object that seemed harmless at first glance, a golden ring with no visible inscriptions. Frodo didn't think much of it initially, but he would soon realize that this gift carried a dangerous secret. There was something peculiar about it. Bilbo had left it behind reluctantly, as if struggling against an invisible enemy within himself. It was as if the ring whispered to him, as though it had a will of its own. Over time, Frodo began to notice subtle changes. The ring seemed heavier than it ought to be, and a restlessness grew inside him whenever he touched it. But it wasn't until Gandalf returned to Bag End years later that the truth emerged. What Frodo had considered merely an odd trinket was, in fact, the One Ring, the dark creation of Sauron, the Lord of the Dark. That tiny piece of metal carried the fate of Middle-earth, and Frodo, now heir not only to Bilbo, but to a terrible burden, would have to decide his next move. The moment of revelation struck Frodo like a bolt from the blue. For years, he had lived unaware of the true power of the ring he kept, until Gandalf returned to Bag End with a somber expression. The wizard asked Frodo to toss the ring into the fireplace, and then hidden signs appeared. Sinister inscriptions written in Mordor's black speech, glowing in fiery letters. One ring to rule them all, one ring to find them. Those were words that left no room for doubt. This wasn't a mere object. It was the key to Sauron's power. The revelation brought with it a terrible truth. As long as Frodo kept the ring, the enemy could find him. The Shire, his peaceful home, was no longer safe. Gandalf, with his unquestionable wisdom, made it clear that Sauron was already on his trail. The shadow of the Lord of the Rings was growing in the east, his wraiths riding across the free lands, and time was running out. Frodo, a simple hobbit, found himself facing an impossible choice: continue his tranquil life, ignoring the danger, or set off into the unknown to save all of Middle-earth. And it was there, at that crossroads of destiny, that Frodo's greatness began to reveal itself. He wasn't a warrior. He didn't wield a sword like Aragorn, nor did he command magic like Gandalf, but he possessed something rare, a quiet courage that emerges when there's no choice but to move forward. And so, on a starry night, with a heavy heart and the ring hidden under his cloak, he made the decision that would change everything. He would leave the Shire. The world out there was vast, dangerous, and filled with mysteries and horrors that even Tolkien might not dare describe in detail. But Frodo could no longer turn back. Leaving the Shire wasn't just a farewell to the green hills and the small comforts of Hobbit life. It was the first step toward an uncertain destiny. Frodo didn't set off alone. Sam, his faithful friend and gardener, refused to let him go without company. And, as every good story needs a touch of chaos, Merry and Pippin ended up joining the group in an unplanned way. Thus, 4 little hobbits left the safety of their homeland and soon learned firsthand that the world beyond the Shire was much larger and darker than they had ever imagined. It wasn't long before they realized they were being hunted. The shadows riding through the night weren't mere travelers. They were the Nazgul, the feared ring-wraiths and direct servants of Sauron. Riding on black horses, they relentlessly pursued the bearer of the One Ring. Frodo and his friends were lucky to find help in the most unexpected of places, the forest of Tom Bombadil. The enigmatic and cheerful Lord of the Forest protected them with a power that even Gandalf couldn't fully comprehend. And so, for a brief moment, they were able to breathe easy before continuing on. But the real turning point came when they arrived at the Prancing Pony in Bree. There, amid suspicious glances and whispered rumors, they met a man who would change their fates forever. Aragorn, also known as Strider, tall, mysterious, and with a gaze that seemed to see through the shadows, he introduced himself as an ally sent by Gandalf. With no other choice, Frodo trusted him, and it was under his leadership that the group pressed on, with the promise of being taken to Rivendell. But as with every good Tolkien tale, the road ahead would be anything but smooth. The journey was just beginning, but danger was already relentless. Under Aragorn's protection, Frodo and his friends traveled tirelessly, crossing unknown lands and avoiding the main roads. Yet even the guidance of an experienced warrior couldn't keep them completely safe. At Weathertop, an ancient ruined hill, fate exacted its toll. The Nazgul found them. In the darkness of the night, the ring-wraiths attacked, and Frodo, gripped by fear and the influence of the One Ring, succumbed to temptation and slipped it on his finger. It was a fatal mistake. The world around him changed. Suddenly, he could see the Nazgul in their true form, corrupted wraiths, shadows of Sauron's will. But seeing them wasn't the same as defeating them. The leader of the Nine, the Witch King of Angmar, advanced mercilessly, wielding a dark blade. Frodo was struck by a Morgul dagger, a wound that was not only physical but spiritual. A cold spread through his body, and darkness began to overtake him. Had it not been for Aragorn's intervention, who faced the wraiths with fire and courage, Frodo might have become a servant of darkness right then and there. With the poison from the wound spreading rapidly, the only hope was to reach Rivendell. Each day of travel became a battle against time and the creeping death in his veins. But fate intervened once again. In his final moments, when all seemed lost, Glorfindel, a mighty elf, came to his aid. The weakened Frodo was placed upon Asfaloth, the swift elven steed, and raced toward the enchanted waters of Rivendell. The Nazgul tried to follow, but nature itself turned against them. The Bruinen River surged in a fury of water and swallowed them up. Frodo passed out. But when he opened his eyes, he was under Elrond's care. He had been saved. For now. Rivendell wasn't just a refuge, it was a crossroads. While Frodo recovered under Elrond's care, forces from all across Middle-earth gathered to decide what to do with the One Ring. Men, elves, and dwarves argued fiercely, each driven by their own ambitions and fears. The dilemma was clear. No one could wield it without being corrupted, yet destroying it would require something that few dared even imagine. It was then that Frodo, small in the presence of so many warriors and kings, stepped forward and said, "The words that would change everything. I will take the ring, though I do not know the way." And so the Fellowship of the Ring was born. To ensure Frodo's protection and the mission's success, a group of 9 was formed. Aragorn, the heir of Isildur, and Boromir, Prince of Gondor, would represent men. Legolas, the elven archer of the woodland realm, would bring elven grace and precision. Gimli, son of Glóin, would offer the strength and endurance of the dwarves. And, of course, Gandalf the Grey would lead the company with his unmatched wisdom. But Frodo wouldn't go without those who had already proven their loyalty. Sam, Merry, and Pippin were also included, ensuring that the Fellowship carried the spirit and courage of the hobbits. The mission was clear, but the path was uncertain. Leaving Rivendell, the group set off southward, carrying the fate of Middle-earth on their shoulders. The tension was palpable, as each member of the Fellowship harbored their own doubts and hidden motivations. Boromir eyed the ring with growing desire, while Legolas and Gimli remained wary of each other. Yet something greater united them. The determination to carry that little hobbit all the way to the flames of Mount Doom. The journey was only just beginning, and the challenges ahead would make even Tolkien's own tales seem mild by comparison. The road along the open path soon became impassable. Saruman's forces lurked nearby, and the treacherous peaks of Caradhras refused to let them pass. The only alternative? A darker, more dangerous route. The mines of Moria. The ancient dwarven stronghold had become a silent tomb, where the only sounds in the shadows were ominous echoes of what was to come. Frodo felt the weight of the decision. Each step into the darkness was a risk, but there was no other choice. The fate of Middle-earth would not wait for daylight, and then came the horror. In the heart of Moria, the Fellowship faced an enemy that even Boromir dared not confront. The Balrog, a creature of fire and shadow, as ancient as the world itself. The monster emerged from the depths, and Gandalf, knowing that no one else could stop it, stayed behind. "You shall not pass," he thundered, his voice echoing through the hall as he confronted the creature on the bridge of Khazad-dûm. And then in one final act of sacrifice, he and the Balrog plunged into the abyss. The shock was devastating. Frodo felt the loss like a dagger to the heart. Without Gandalf, how could they possibly continue? Yet even in mourning, the journey could not stop. The exit from Moria led them to Lothlorien, Galadriel's golden realm. Unlike any place Frodo had ever seen, the forest was a breath of magic and mystery. There, he received a gift that would one day save his life, the light of Erendil, a small vial containing the radiance of the brightest star. "May it be a light in the dark places, when all other lights go out," Galadriel said. Frodo clutched the vial, unaware that one day he would depend on it to face an even greater terror. But time was short. The ring was calling, and fate was far from fulfilled. The Fellowship of the Ring had withstood unspeakable dangers, but the true test did not come from without. It came from within. The weight of the One Ring rested not only on Frodo's shoulders, but also on the hearts of those around him. At Amon Hen, Boromir, consumed by the desire to protect Gondor at any cost, succumbed to temptation. He confronted Frodo, trying to convince him to hand over the ring, but his plea quickly turned into an attempt to seize it by force. Frodo's heart raced. He knew the power of the ring. He knew that no one could possess it without being consumed. And then, in an act of desperation, he slipped on the ring and vanished. That was the hardest decision he had ever made. He cherished the company of his friends, but he knew that if he stayed by their side, the ring would destroy them all. Boromir had already fallen. Who would be next? Aragorn? Legolas? Even Gandalf dared not touch it. Frodo needed to go alone, and so, by the banks of the river Anduin, he prepared his escape. But before he could leave, Sam appeared, running, tripping in the water, refusing to let him go. "Not without you, Mr. Frodo," he insisted. And in that moment, the only certainty Frodo had was this: he could never do it alone. Meanwhile, the Fellowship began to fracture. Boromir, overwhelmed with remorse, fought until his final breath to protect Merry and Pippin from the orcs. Aragorn, Legolas and Gimli stayed behind, forced onto a new path. The mission, which had begun with 9, was now reduced to 2. Frodo and Sam pressed on toward Mordor, carrying the burden of Middle-earth, unaware that a pair of hungry eyes lurked in the shadows. Gollum was following them, and the road ahead would be even more treacherous. It wasn't long before Frodo and Sam realized they were being followed. Gollum, the creature twisted by the power of the ring, slithered through the shadows, muttering to himself, torn between his desire to reclaim his precious and the fear of being caught. Sam, ever suspicious, wanted to get rid of him right then and there, but Frodo saw something different. He didn't just see an enemy. He saw a distorted mirror of himself, a silent warning of what could happen if the One Ring completely corrupted him. Realizing they could use him as a guide, Frodo did the unthinkable. He spared Gollum and brought him along on his journey. At first, the creature proved useful. He knew secret passages and shortcuts through the dead marshes, where the specters of past wars lay beneath treacherous waters. "Don't look at the lights, Mr. Frodo," Sam warned, but the ring's influence was strong. Frodo felt the spirits calling him, nearly dragging him under, so that he would never return. Ironically, it was Gollum who saved him at that moment. The path to Mordor wasn't merely physical, it was a mental trial, where the line between reality and madness grew ever thinner. But something was wrong. Gollum was indeed guiding them, but to where? His loyalty was as unstable as his mind. He whispered promises and swore fealty, yet Sam never trusted him. "He's leading us into a trap." "Mr. Frodo," he insisted. But Frodo, tired and weighed down by the ring's burden, saw in Gollum more an ally than a traitor. Could he be redeemed? Could that broken soul still have a chance at salvation? The answer would come soon, and it wouldn't be pleasant. Frodo and Sam's journey led them into the lands of Ithilien, where for the first time in a long while they encountered a human presence that wasn't intent on killing them. Faramir, Boromir's brother, and his men captured them, suspecting they might be spies. But unlike his brother, Faramir wasn't seduced by the ring's temptation. He saw in Frodo not a bearer of power, but an exhausted traveler, burdened with a weight no one should bear alone. Still, the dilemma remained. Should he let them go or hand them over to Gondor? Faramir soon realized he couldn't repeat Boromir's mistake. He took them to a hidden refuge where Frodo enjoyed a rare moment of rest. But the respite was short-lived. Gollum, who had been shadowing the hobbits closely, was captured by Faramir's men. Frodo's eyes filled with compassion, yet Sam remained certain the creature was treacherous. Even so, Frodo interceded on his behalf, convincing Faramir to let him go, a decision that would weigh heavily later on. Against Faramir's advice, Frodo decided to take the most dangerous route to Mordor, the pass of Cirith Ungol, a dark trail that led straight to the infernal city of Minas Morgul. As they passed its walls, they felt the raw terror of Sauron's power. A gigantic enemy force was marching toward war, led by the Witch King himself. Frodo, overwhelmed by the ring's influence, nearly succumbed right there. The call was irresistible. If not for Sam, who pulled him back to reality, he might have been discovered. But the worst was yet to come. The path through Cirith Ungol grew ever narrower, darker, and more oppressive. The stone walls seemed to close in around Frodo and Sam, and a putrid stench hung in the air, suffocating them. Gollum, still muttering to himself, led them onward, but something was amiss. He became increasingly submissive, more anxious with every step, as if he were about to divulge a long-hidden secret. And then, without warning, he vanished. Alone, the hobbits realized too late they had entered the lair of an ancient, terrifying creature. There it was, Larachna, the monstrous spider of forgotten ages, daughter of Middle-earth's oldest shadows. Its gleaming eyes fixed hungrily on Frodo, its legs moving silently like a nightmare. With no time to run, Frodo raised the light of Eärendil, the gift from Galadriel. The light shone brilliantly, pushing back the darkness for a moment, but it was only a delay of the inevitable. Frodo tried to run, yet the weight of the ring slowed him down. The spider attacked. Its venomous fangs struck his body, and then darkness. When Sam found Frodo lying motionless, his heart stopped. Frodo was still, lifeless. Despair overwhelmed him, and for a moment he believed everything had been in vain. But death had not yet claimed his friend. Frodo was poisoned, fallen into a deep, death-like sleep from Larachna's venom. With tears in his eyes and an unexpected fire in his heart, Sam did what he could. He grabbed Frodo's sword, took the One Ring, and decided to continue the journey alone. Sam was now alone. For the first time on this entire journey, the loyal hobbit carried not only his own hope, but also that of Frodo's. With Sting clutched in his hand and the One Ring hanging about his neck, he did the unthinkable. He infiltrated Cirith Ungol, a stronghold teeming with orcs and vile creatures, to rescue his friend. Driven by a courage even he didn't know he possessed, he scaled the treacherous walls of the tower and by sheer chance, or perhaps fate, encountered chaos. The orcs had turned on one another in a scramble for plunder. The passage was now open, and there lay Frodo, unconscious, weak, confined in a corner of the tower, without his sword, without his armor, and most importantly, without the ring. The orcs had stripped him, but they hadn't found the true treasure. Disguised in orc mail, Sam crept through the dark corridors, taking down anyone who crossed his path. When he finally found Frodo and awoke him, it was as if the world had regained its color. But the joy was fleeting. Frodo, still burdened by poison and despair, longed for the ring and, in a moment of panic, clutched at Sam. "Where is it?" he demanded with feverish eyes. Without hesitation, Sam returned it. The burden was never his to bear. Now, dressed as orcs to avoid detection, the two hobbits escaped the tower and finally entered the lands of Mordor. But whereas before they had traveled hidden, now there was no shelter, no safe roads. The ground was ashen, the sky weighed heavy like lead, and Mount Doom roared in the distance. Frodo staggered, each step growing more difficult than the last. The end was near. But would it be the end of his journey, or the end of his soul? Every step in Mordor was a battle against sheer exhaustion. The ground was rough, the air dry and thick with the smoke of Mount Doom. Frodo was no longer the same hobbit who had left the Shire. His body was weakened, his mind drained, and the ring whispered louder and louder. Sam, ever faithful, supported his friend when his legs gave out, though even his strength had limits. The journey had reduced them to mere shadows of who they once were. And yet they continued, because there was no other choice. Reaching the crack of doom should have marked the end. The place where it all began, where Sauron forged the One Ring, where the mission would be completed. But the ring, now so close to its maker, refused to be destroyed. Overwhelmed by its influence, Frodo raised it and declared, "The ring is mine." What had once been merely a burden had become an addiction. He could no longer part with it. Sam screamed, tried to pull him back to reason, but it was too late. The hero of the story had succumbed. Yet fate works in strange ways. Gollum, who had followed them all this way, lunged at Frodo, driven mad by the desire to reclaim his precious. Amidst the struggle, he bit Frodo's finger and, in the end, recovered the ring. His victory, however, lasted only seconds. In the ecstasy of his triumph, Gollum stumbled and fell into the abyss, taking the ring with him and sealing Sauron's fate. The One Ring was consumed by the flames that had forged it, and the moment it disintegrated, Sauron's shadow was eradicated forever. Frodo, utterly exhausted, collapsed beside Sam as he watched the end of the Dark Reign. The burden had been carried to the very end, but can a hero ever return to who they once were after bearing the weight of all Middle-earth? Mount Doom crumbled around them, rivers of fire spreading over the cracked earth, and there was nowhere left to run. Frodo and Sam, spent and broken, fell among the rocks, resigned to their inevitable fate. There was no strength left, there was no hope left, but when everything seemed lost, help came from the skies. The great eagles, led by Gwaihir, soared over the devastated lands of Mordor, rescuing the two small heroes before the flames could consume them. When Frodo opened his eyes again, he was safe in Ithilien, surrounded by friends, and for the first time in a long while, free from the ring's burden. But Middle-earth not only survived, it was reborn. In Minas Tirith, Aragorn was crowned king, fulfilling the destiny he had once feared to accept. The White City flourished, and the kingdom of men grew stronger under his leadership. Frodo was there, witnessing the moment when Sauron's era finally ended. Amid the celebration, Arwen, Elrond's daughter, presented Frodo with an unexpected gift, his right to journey to the Undying Lands, a path that only the elves could tread. It was a gesture of gratitude, and also a silent acknowledgement of all that he had lost along the way. The truth was a harsh one. Even without the ring, the scars remained. Frodo would never be the same hobbit who left the Shire. He had carried a burden greater than anyone could bear, and now, even surrounded by peace, he still felt the void left by all he had lost. And so, as Middle-earth rejoiced, he began to realize that his own journey might not end there. The Shire was still the same, but Frodo was not. When he, Sam, Merry, and Pippin finally returned home, they expected to find the same tranquility as before. But something was amiss. The Shire was no longer an untouched haven. Saruman, humiliated after Sauron's fall, had taken refuge there, spreading his influence and turning Hobbitland into a gloomy place. Taverns no longer echoed with laughter, the hills were scarred, and a regime of fear had taken hold. Evil had arrived. This time, however, it wasn't Gandalf or Aragorn who would come to save the day. It was the hobbits themselves. Merry and Pippin, now seasoned warriors, led the resistance against the invaders. Sam, with his unwavering loyalty, inspired his companions to fight for the land they loved. And Frodo, he didn't raise a sword. He had seen too much blood, too much pain. His battle was different. With words and determination, he confronted Saruman not with violence, but with compassion, refusing to stoop to his enemy's level. The Shire was freed, yet Frodo realized something that others had not yet seen. He no longer belonged there. His friends were ready to resume their lives, but he, surrounded by green fields and cozy hearths, felt that something inside him was broken. The peace he had helped secure wasn't his to enjoy. Fate still had one final path for him to follow. The Shire was saved, Middle-earth was at peace, but Frodo found no rest. The wounds he had suffered weren't only physical, they were scars that time itself could not heal. Nights were haunted by memories of the journey. The weight of the ring still loomed over his mind, and the pain from the Morgul blade never fully faded. He had given everything to save the world, yet in the end he felt like a stranger in his own home. Then the call came. Frodo received an invitation to depart with the last great elves of Middle-earth, to sail beyond the sea, to the Undying Lands, a destination reserved only for those who had borne great burdens. At the Grey Havens, he met Gandalf, Elrond, Galadriel, and of course Bilbo, now very old. The old hobbit who had once given him the ring was also ready for his final journey. Sam, Merry, and Pippin were there to bid farewell, but only Sam truly understood. He knew that Frodo needed to go, and so, under a golden sky, Frodo boarded the ship that would carry him beyond the confines of Middle-earth. As the vessel glided over the waters, he felt, for the first time in a long while, the absence of the weight he had carried for so long. The story of Frodo Baggins, the ring-bearer, was coming to an end, but his legacy would remain forever, echoing like the timeless tales that Tolkien left us. A hobbit who left his land without seeking glory, and who, in the end, found peace far from it. And now tell me, how many times have you felt like Frodo, carrying a burden too heavy to bear, facing challenges that seemed larger than yourself, feeling that the world expects more than you can give? The truth is, Frodo's story isn't just a fantasy penned by Tolkien, it's a mirror of our own journey. How many times do we let the weight of our battles blind us to what truly matters? How many times do we forget that in the end it's the small gestures, the quiet courage, and the persistence that really change the world? Frodo never sought greatness. He never wanted to be a hero. But it was precisely because of that he became one. And that's the great lesson here. We aren't always chosen for the challenges we face, but it's those very challenges that shape who we become. The question is, are you ready to carry your own burden to the very end, or will you give up halfway? If this story inspired you, if it made you see Frodo's journey in a new light, then subscribe to the channel and hit the notifications bell. Here, we explore not only the legends of Middle-earth, but also the deeper meanings behind them. Because great stories aren't meant just to entertain, they teach us how to be better, and that's a lesson even the wise of Rivendell would never dare ignore.